The copper-colored sun broke through a sky quilted in gray, casting long, deliberate shadows across the cracked pavement of Woodbury Meadows. Here, in this half-forgotten corner of town where rust clung to everything and ambition rusted too, Charles Hartman crouched beside an aging Chevy pickup. His spine, bent from years of hard work and harder luck, folded like the hood he'd just propped open. The quiet groan of a wrench turning against metal echoed faintly in the still morning air. His hands, scarred and calloused, moved with the grace of memory. Every twist, every pull told the story of a man who once engineered miracles in corporate labs, but now traded engine repairs for home-cooked meals. His faded work shirt bore a name patch that had nearly dissolved from time and detergent. Charlie, stitched, the thread barely hanging on. "Almost done, Mrs. Peterson," he called softly. His voice was gravel and warmth, like something worn but dependable. From the porch of a nearby trailer, a frail woman in her 70s clutched a thermos with trembling fingers. "You're a godsend, Charlie Hartman. Don't know what I'd do without you." Charles didn't answer. He just closed the hood gently as if the old truck were something sacred. He wiped his hands on a rag that was once white, but now stained the color of long days and longer nights. The engine turned over on the first try. It purred like it had remembered something good. Mrs. Peterson clapped her hands, shuffled over, and pressed a $20 bill into his palm. "And don't you dare argue," she said. "That's less than Warren Schmidt would charge just to look at it." Charles nodded with a reluctant smile. $20 wouldn't fix his problems, but it would buy gas for the week. Maybe a loaf of bread. Maybe quiet his daughter's worry for one more day. Then came the message, buzzing into his phone with the softness of a hammer blow. "Dad, don't forget I need the registration fee for the science competition by tomorrow. $50. Sorry, he read it twice, jaw clenched, eyes soft. Amelia's science competitions weren't optional. They were her escape hatch, her rocket fuel, the one promise he'd made to her mother before she died. Mrs. Peterson caught the change in his expression. "You okay?" Charles forced a smile. "Just fine." Back in his trailer, a small, spotless sanctuary built on scraped knees and quiet sacrifices. The walls bore photographs of the man he used to be. A man in a lab coat. A man beside a patent certificate. A man holding a baby girl and looking like the future was his for the taking. But the future had other plans. Now he had bills marked final notice. Rent increasing, job applications ignored, and time running out. And then, as if fate had been eavesdropping, a sleek electric vehicle rolled to a stop on the roadside just beyond Woodbury Meadows. Broken down, stranded, and from it stepped a woman far from this world. Designer clothes, polished shoes, phone pressed to her ear. She was out of place. So was the car. So was the moment. Charles almost drove past. Almost, but he didn't, because something in him, something still stubborn and unsilenced, told him to stop. He didn't know then, but that single decision would rewrite everything. A breeze stirred the dust along Willow Lane as Charles walked the cracked path home. Woodbury Meadows didn't have sidewalks, just well-worn shortcuts between trailers where children played with duct-taped basketballs and neighbors bartered favors in place of rent. He climbed 3 creaky steps into his trailer. It was small, humble, but spotless. Charles kept it that way. Order was the only thing left he could control. On the wall, a small gallery of memories, a young Charles in a graduation cap, a wedding photo with Sarah, radiant and laughing, Amelia's baby pictures, a toothless smile, peeking out from pink blankets. It was a museum of the life they'd once believed in. Now the kitchen table was buried in overdue bills, rejection letters from engineering firms, and a warning from the trailer park management about a rent increase. Charles swept the mess into a drawer. His phone buzzed again. A reminder, $50 science competition registration due tomorrow. Tomorrow, he muttered, like saying it out loud might push the date further. There was a knock at the door. It was Benjamin Lopez, his neighbor, his only real friend in the park. Round-faced, always kind, even when he couldn't afford to be. "Charlie," Ben said quietly. Tom Parker's making rounds again. Says he's starting evictions next week for anyone more than 2 months behind. Charles exhaled slowly. Thanks for the warning. How far behind are you? 6 weeks, Ben hesitated. I've got some overtime this week. I could spot you. No, Charles said firmly. We'll be okay. Ben didn't argue. He just nodded and left, dignity intact. As soon as the door shut, Charles pulled out his phone and started dialing. One repair job after another, no one had anything. Until a farmer outside town mentioned a broken tractor. The pay, barely enough, to cover Amelia's fee. Still, it was something. He was collecting his tools when the school bus groaned to a halt outside. Moments later, Amelia burst through the door, her brown hair tied back in a practical ponytail, backpack slung lazily over. One shoulder, eyes wide with fire. Dad, she beamed, Mrs. Foster says my project has a real shot at state finals. If I win, I could get a scholarship to the Brighton University summer program. Charles's heart swelled. That's incredible, he said, meaning every word. And don't worry about the fee. It's covered. Amelia paused. You didn't. Take another payday loan, right? No, he lied. Fixed Mrs. Peterson's truck this morning, and there's a tractor job tonight. She dropped her backpack and started rolling up her sleeves. I'll come. I can help. It's a school night. I'll work on my project in the truck. Charles hesitated. Truth was, she was better with mechanical work than half the guys at Warren Schmidt's garage. Dinner first, he relented. Then we'll see. They ate spaghetti, cheap sauce, overcooked noodles, and quiet understanding. Amelia took a smaller portion than usual. Charles noticed. He didn't say anything. Later, as she organized her notes at the kitchen table, Charles stepped outside and looked up at the fading sky. The tractor job couldn't wait. He kissed her forehead gently. Be back soon. The pickup sputtered on. The third try. The check engine light had been on for weeks. He turned onto the main road, the sun dipping behind distant hills, throwing long shadows over cracked billboards and forgotten storefronts. Then he saw it. A black vehicle, sleek, high-end. Hazard lights blinking like beacons. A woman in her 20s stood beside it, frustration written in every line of her expensive posture. Charles almost kept driving, but he stopped. Because Sarah would have wanted him to. Because it was dark, and she was alone. Because it was the right thing to do. He rolled down the window. Everything okay? The woman turned, surprised. Her hair was dark auburn, tied back tightly. Her clothes screamed Brighton Heights. Yes, she said, breathless. Well, no. It just died. And none of the local mechanics can get here until morning. I have a meeting in Brighton Heights at 8 a.m. Charles glanced at the car. A Woodward Pulse, a prototype. Limited production. He hadn't seen one in person, but he knew what it was. I can take a look, he offered. I'm a mechanic. Sort of, he added. She hesitated. Then, seeing something in his face, or maybe just out of desperation, she nodded. I'm Audrey Woodward. That name. Woodward Technologies. Charles's heart kicked. She gestured toward the car. If you can fix it, I'll be forever grateful. Charles stepped out, toolbox in hand. As the hood opened, he felt it. Something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity, focus, a switch flipping on deep inside. He ran his fingers across the hybrid. System, already diagnosing. You've got a flaw in the thermal regulator, he muttered almost to himself. It's stressing the power management module. Audrey blinked. How could you possibly know that? Because, he said without thinking, I would have designed it differently. For the next 45 minutes, under dimming sky and phone flashlights, Charles worked, precise, efficient, silent. Finally, he stepped back. Try it now. Audrey turned the key. The engine purred. Smoother, sharper. It's better than new, she said, stunned. I rerouted the electrical system, Charles said. Should give you 15% better efficiency. Audrey stared at him. Who are you? Charles packed up his tools. Just someone who's good with engines. Audrey stood there, silent for a moment, the hum of the engine still warm behind her. You're not just some backyard mechanic, she said slowly, her voice tinged with something between admiration and disbelief. You improved a hybrid system that stumped our engineers. Charles looked away, the night pressing in. I've worked on a few engines in my time, he said simply. She pulled her purse from the passenger seat and reached for her wallet. Please, let me pay you. For your time, at least. Charles hesitated. The money would help. Badly, gas, groceries, Amelia's registration fee. It would keep their world turning a little longer. But that job, fixing Audrey's car, had stirred something in him. Something more important than a few bills. It had reminded him who he used to be. No charge, he said, closing his toolbox. Audrey frowned. You don't want anything? He paused, then nodded toward the car. That was the most interesting machine I've touched in years. Thanks for the challenge. You sure? She pressed. Charles gave her a crooked smile. You already paid me, in curiosity. Audrey laughed softly. It wasn't the response she expected. I have to ask, she said. Would you be willing to speak with someone at my mother's company? Woodward Technologies is always scouting new talent. Engineers, designers, consultants. A bitter smile tugged at Charles's mouth. I already applied, he said. As an engineer a while back. Audrey blinked. You applied and they rejected you? Got the form letter. Thanks, but no thanks. What did you apply for? Director-level engineering role, he said, voice steady. I used to build prototypes like the Pulse before life. Changed. She stared at him, something shifting in her eyes. What's your name? She asked softly. Charles Hartman, he replied. Most people just call me Charlie. Audrey pulled a card from her purse and scribbled on the back. This is my direct line. If you change your mind, or if you want to talk about that design flaw you spotted, call me, please. Charles pocketed the card, more out of politeness than hope. I live at the end of Willow Lane, Woodbury Meadows, she nodded. Got it. Then something changed. Her posture straightened, her voice steadied. I'm not going to forget this, she said. Or you. Charles gave her a small wave and climbed into his truck. The engine coughed but caught. As he drove away, headlights cutting through the night, he checked his rearview mirror one last time. Audrey stood still in the glow of her repaired vehicle, phone already to her ear. He didn't know it yet. But that call, placed on a dark roadside under an indifferent sky, would upend everything. Because on the other end of that line wasn't just a manager or a recruiter. It was Pamela Woodward, CEO, visionary, and mother. Back in his trailer, Charles stepped inside quietly. Amelia had fallen asleep at the kitchen table. Science project notes scattered across the surface, highlighter caps off, her pen still clutched, loosely in her hand. Charles tucked a blanket around her and turned off the lamp. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the $20 bill Mrs. Peterson had given him earlier. He placed it under Amelia's textbook, not enough for the fee, but it was something. He glanced toward the couch, his makeshift bed, and rubbed a tired hand over his face. Another missed job, another long night. But this one had been different. He didn't know it yet, but miles away in a luxury hotel room, Audrey Woodward was recounting everything. Every detail of the man who'd fixed the unfixable and walked away without asking for a dime. She described the way he diagnosed the flaw, the ease in his hands, the way he spoke like an engineer who had nothing to prove, because he'd already proven it once. Her mother listened silently, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to her assistant and said just one sentence. Find everything you can on Charles Hartman, Woodbury Meadows. Start with his patents. Back in his darkened trailer, Charles sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees. He didn't know it yet, but the next day everything would change. Not because he'd asked for it, not because he chased it, but because his quiet brilliance refused to stay buried. Dawn came gently to Woodbury Meadows. A wash of pale light crept over the rows of trailers, turning condensation to gold. Charles stirred on the pull-out couch, muscles stiff from another night curled on springs that had long since given up. For a moment, he stayed still. calculating what bills were due this week, whether there'd be enough gas to take Amelia to school and still make it to any job leads, whether the check engine light blinking on his truck meant something serious, or just another warning he could ignore. Then, thump, 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 a low sound, rhythmic, growing. Charles sat up. The noise grew louder. The windows began to tremble in their frames. Outside, the world vibrated. A helicopter, getting closer. He pulled on his jeans, confused. Nobody in Woodbury got helicopter visits, not unless they were being airlifted for a medical emergency, or being raided. He stepped out into the crisp morning and shielded his eyes just in time to see a sleek black aircraft crest the tree line. It circled once, then lowered itself with a slow, commanding grace onto the community field behind his trailer. Dust spiraled. Lawn chairs blew sideways. A child's plastic bike flipped over. Neighbors emerged from their homes, blinking and murmuring, coffee mugs in hand. Benjamin Lopez appeared at Charles's steps, grinning wide. "Charlie, you've got a visitor." "What?" "There's a woman asking for you. Fancy SUV driver, the whole deal. Said it was urgent." Charles's gut tightened. "Who?" Benjamin shrugged. "Didn't give a name. But she's wearing a suit that probably costs more than my truck." Something clicked. Audrey. Or someone above her. Charles wiped his hands on his jeans and moved quickly. He didn't run, but he didn't dawdle either. As he neared the community entrance, he spotted it. A black SUV parked at an angle by the rusted sign that read, Woodbury Meadows, established 1971. Its doors were opened by a uniformed driver, and then she stepped out. Not Audrey. Someone older. Early 50s, maybe. Crisp charcoal suit, silver-streaked hair cut in a sharp bob. Her stride was exact, her presence commanding. Pamela Woodward, CEO of Woodward Technologies, mother of Audrey, one of the most powerful women in the automotive industry, and she was here. On this gravel path, in this fading town, at his doorstep, she extended a hand. "Mr. Hartman, I believe you helped my daughter last night." Charles stared, caught off guard not just by who she was, but by how she said it, not in judgment, not in disbelief, in acknowledgement. He shook her hand, feeling the roughness of his fingers meet the polish of hers. "Yes, ma'am." Her car broke. "Down." "And you didn't just fix it," Pamela said. "You diagnosed a flaw our entire engineering team missed." Charles stayed silent. "I'd like to speak with you." "Privately," she added. "I have a proposition I believe will interest you." He glanced back toward his trailer. "My daughter's still sleeping. I can't leave her alone." Pamela nodded once. "Of course. Perhaps there's a diner nearby?" Charles thought. The Rise and Shine opens at 6. "I'll have my driver follow you," Pamela said smoothly. "Lead the way." 10 minutes later, Charles walked into the local diner. Stained floors, cracked booths, and the smell of bacon grease clinging to the ceiling tiles. Everyone looked up. Nobody missed Pamela Woodward walking through their door. Judy. The owner blinked twice before recovering. "Coffee, Charlie, and for your guest." "Black," Pamela said. They slid into a booth near the window. Once the mugs were filled and the small talk faded, Pamela opened a leather folio. Her movements were precise, measured. This woman was used to running empires. "My daughter was impressed," she said. "But I was more than impressed, I was curious." She slid a few pages toward him. Charles blinked. His name, his patents, his history. "I had my assistant dig," she said unapologetically. "What we found was interesting." Charles's throat tightened. "You worked at Davidson Automotive, helped pioneer their early hybrid systems, filed multiple patents." She paused. "And then 10 years ago, you vanished. The same year Davidson launched their breakthrough engine, the one based suspiciously close to your designs." Charles looked away. Pamela leaned in slightly. "They stole your work, didn't they?" The words hit like a sucker punch. "Not because they were wrong, but because they were so plainly true." "My wife got sick," Charles said, voice low. "Cancer. I was fighting the lawsuit and fighting to keep her alive, couldn't do both." Pamela's expression softened. "I'm sorry." He nodded. "After she died, Davidson blackballed me, couldn't get work anywhere. So I did what I had to. And now you fix trucks in Woodbury, she said gently. For now, he said. There was a pause. A long one. Pamela pushed another document toward him. I want you to come work for me. As Director of Innovation, oversee the next generation of our hybrid systems. You'll have a full team, creative freedom, a salary that reflects your worth. Charles blinked. It was everything he'd once dreamed of. And your daughter? Pamela added. Her scholarship to Brighton University's summer program is already approved. Full ride. His heart caught in his throat. This feels like a lot, he said. Based on one repair job? Pamela's gaze was cool, unflinching. It's not based on a repair job. It's based on what kind of man fixes a car he didn't build, with tools he doesn't have, for someone who won't pay him, and still makes it better. Charles stared at her, silent. You've spent 10 years surviving, she said. Maybe it's time you started building again. He looked down at his calloused hands, the ones that once held blueprints, not wrenches. I need to talk to daughter. Of course. Pamela stood gathering her papers. One more thing, she said. He looked up. You'll want to be outside your trailer at 9 a.m. Why? She smiled, cool and enigmatic. To meet your transportation. The sun climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning mist. Woodbury Meadows was fully awake now. Children chased each other down cracked asphalt paths. Radios hummed from open trailer doors. Lawn sprinklers clicked in rhythmic bursts. But all activity ground to a halt when the helicopter reappeared. It came in low, banking gracefully above the tree line before settling again on the same community field it had touched just hours earlier. This time, Charles and Amelia stood side by side, watching. Amelia wore pajama pants and a hoodie, her hair still sleep-tousled. Dad, she whispered, eyes wide. Why is it back? Because, Charles said, swallowing hard. They're here for us. The helicopter door opened. Pamela Woodward stepped down, elegant as ever in a tailored suit that barely moved in the downdraft. She didn't hesitate. She strode straight toward them. Neighbors watched from their porches. Conversations had stopped. Someone was filming with a phone. Warren Schmidt stood across the lot, mouth agape, tools dangling forgotten from his grease-streaked hands. Pamela extended a hand to Amelia first. You must be Amelia. Amelia blinked, then shook it. Yes, ma'am. Your father is quite the engineer, Pamela said, and I understand you share his interest. Alternative fuel efficiency, right? Amelia glanced at her dad, stunned. How do you know that? Pamela smiled. I sent the scholarship. Your application was impressive. I thought we could deliver the good news in person. Charles gently placed a hand on Amelia's shoulder. Ms. Woodward offered me a job in Brighton Heights. A real engineering job? Amelia asked, voice shaking. Pamela nodded. More than real. He'd be directing our innovation team. But before we discussed logistics, she turned, motioning to the helicopter. I thought you'd both like a tour, Amelia gasped. A tour in that? Charles chuckled. She doesn't do small gestures. Pamela raised an eyebrow. I believe in clarity and impressions, shall we? Minutes later, they were airborne. Woodbury shrank beneath them. The trailer park looked almost serene from above, its flaws softened by distance and morning light. Amelia pressed her face to the window, murmuring awe with every passing second. Charles watched her. For once, she wasn't calculating costs or hiding disappointment. She looked like a girl allowed to hope. Brighton Heights appeared on the horizon. Steel and glass gleaming like the future itself. Pamela leaned forward. First stop, our engineering lab, then the university. Your scholarship paperwork is waiting. Charles blinked. You're serious. Deadly, she replied. Talent deserves oxygen. Yours has been suffocating. It's time to let it breathe. The helicopter banked gently. Below them, a new chapter waited. One built not on survival, but on potential finally unleashed. The helicopter touched down on the private helipad at Woodward Technologies with practiced ease. A uniformed staff member opened the door. Charles stepped out first. followed by Amelia and Pamela. The air smelled clean, industrial with a hint of pine from the landscaping. Birdsong mixed with the distant hum of air conditioners. "Welcome to your possible future," Pamela said as they approached the main building. The headquarters loomed ahead, 6 stories of curved glass and brushed steel, a structure that looked more like a concept drawing than a functional workplace. Charles's boots clicked against the pristine stone as they stepped inside. The atrium was filled with light and quiet energy. Engineers in sleek attire moved with purpose. A vertical garden climbed one wall, lush and glowing. Digital screens displayed schematics of hybrid engines, power cycles, and projected innovations. Pamela's assistant, a sharp-eyed young woman named Maya, greeted them. "Conference room 2 is ready, Ms. Woodward. Mr. Hartman's visitor badge is prepped. Amelia's too." Amelia blinked. "I get a badge?" "Temporary student clearance," Maya replied with a smile. "Standard for scholarship recipients." Charles's name was already printed on his. Seeing it in bold, Charles Hartman, guest engineer, made something shift inside him. It felt official, like the past 10 years of struggle had been a long prelude to this door. The elevator ride to the innovation lab was silent, save for the soft whir of ascent. When the doors opened, Jason Reynolds was waiting. "Mr. Hartman," he said, shaking Charles's hand. "Welcome back." Jason grinned at Amelia. "Heard you're a rising star yourself." Amelia blushed, eyes wide. "I'm just a student." Jason gestured to the sprawling lab behind him. "So were most of us. Come on. Let's show you where real ideas are born." Inside the lab, Charles's senses were overwhelmed. Workbenches bristled with prototype engines, diagnostic rigs, and augmented reality displays. Engineers clustered in quiet groups, heads bent over problems. Jason guided them to a test rig holding a modified version of the pulse engine. "We implemented the adjustments you made roadside," Jason said to Charles. "Preliminary tests show a 17% gain in efficiency." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You already prototyped it?" Pamela stepped in. "We move fast here, especially when we see talent." One of the engineers, a woman with a tight braid and fierce eyes, joined them. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, lead on thermal systems. You're the guy who spotted our blind spot." Charles extended a hand. "Nice to meet you." "I wasn't thrilled about being corrected by someone outside the team," Vasquez admitted. "But then I saw your solution. Elegant, simple, effective." Charles nodded. "I've made a few mistakes, but I always respect good engineering," Pamela cut in. "There's more. Let's visit the university." They returned to the helicopter. 10 minutes later, they descended on the campus of Brighton University. Red brick buildings gave way to the sharp, modern edge of the engineering center. Professor Helen Mitchell awaited them in the main lobby. She wore a crisp blazer, silver hair pulled back, glasses resting low on her nose. "Ms. Woodward," she greeted. "And this must be Amelia Hartman." Amelia offered a tentative handshake. "Yes, ma'am," Helen smiled. "Your proposal stood out. Practical, grounded, and, most importantly, original. We think you belong here." Charles looked between them, stunned. "Already?" Pamela replied. "Insight doesn't wait. Neither should we." Helen gestured to a nearby hallway. "Amelia, some of our current students are in the lab. Want to meet them?" Amelia glanced at Charles, then back to Helen. "I'd love to." As she disappeared down the corridor, Pamela turned to Charles. "Now that you've seen what your daughter's future could look like, let's talk about yours." They moved to a quiet courtyard shaded by flowering trees. Wind rustled the branches above. Pamela opened a folder and handed him a thick envelope. "Offer letter," she said. "Director of Innovation. Full benefits, relocation support, and complete creative freedom." Charles took the envelope but didn't open it. "Why me?" Pamela looked at him squarely. "Because you saw what no one else did. Because you've been out of the game and still think sharper than my best team. And because I like poetic justice." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Edward Davidson stole your work," she said. "Now, you'll replace what he built with something better. From inside my walls." Silence stretched between them. Charles finally spoke. "I'll think about it." Pamela didn't flinch. Of course. But make no mistake, this isn't just a job. It's a reckoning. For you. For what they took. Behind them, Amelia's laughter rang from the lab building. Charles closed his eyes briefly, listening. "Give me until tonight," he said. Pamela smiled. "Take all the time you need. Just don't take 10 more years." As they reboarded the helicopter, the university shrinking behind them, Charles realized something he hadn't dared believe in years. He had options, real ones, and maybe, just maybe, a future. The helicopter's blades were still turning when they landed back at Woodbury Meadows. Dust kicked up in spirals around the open field, scattering leaves and sending neighbors into doorways, peeking out like it was a scene from a movie. Charles stepped down first, Amelia at his side, followed by Pamela in her powerfully silent presence. The noise of the rotors faded, but the noise inside Charles's head only grew louder. Pamela turned to him. "We'll be in touch tomorrow. Whatever your answer is, I'm glad we met." Charles gave a nod, unsure if his feet were still on solid ground. Amelia waved as the helicopter lifted off again. It banked east toward Brighton Heights, toward something neither of them could quite name yet. As they walked back through the park, whispers followed them. Warren Schmidt stood outside his garage, wiping grease from his hands, jaw slack. A few kids pointed. One of the Lopez boys snapped a picture. "Dad," Amelia said, her voice hushed but clear. That was insane. He didn't respond. Not yet. He was still translating what had just happened into something he could believe. At the trailer, the living room looked smaller now, more fragile. Amelia kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch, laughing like she hadn't in years. Charles sat at the table, envelope in hand, unopened. He finally tore the flap and read. Pamela hadn't exaggerated. The salary was more than generous. Stock options, health insurance, full scholarship support for Amelia. A path. He sat with it for nearly an hour. When Amelia padded in with a bowl of cereal barefoot, he spoke. "We'd have to move." Amelia nodded slowly. "Okay. You'd be leaving school. Friends." She raised her eyebrows. "What friends?" He laughed softly, bitter and sweet. "I guess that's true. Dad." She looked at him with that Sarah look, the one that stripped excuses bare. "Do you want this?" He hesitated, then answered honestly. "I'm terrified." Amelia put down her spoon. Of what? Of failing again, of trusting someone like Pamela, of being wrong. She stepped close and touched his shoulder. "You've been scared for 10 years and you still kept going. What would Mom say if she were here right now?" Charles looked up at her, his throat tight. "She'd say I already failed once. So what's the worst that could happen, Amelia?" Smiled, quiet and brave. "Then let's do it." He exhaled like he hadn't breathed in years. "Okay," he whispered. "Let's do it." The next morning, Charles called Pamela. She answered on the first ring. "I'm in," he said. "Excellent," she replied without a beat. "I'll have HR reach out. Orientation Monday, be ready." The next weeks blurred into movement, paperwork, packing, goodbye visits. Benjamin Lopez organized a neighborhood BBQ in Charles's honor. Even Warren showed up, sheepish and awkward. "You're really doing it, huh?" Warren asked, watching Charles pack his toolbox. "Guess I am," "Well," Warren said, scratching his beard. "If you ever need parts, I know where to find you." Charles finished with a faint smile. The day they left, Amelia stood by the front steps, holding Sarah's photo. Charles watched her from the driver's seat of his battered truck, now filled with their life. "You good?" he asked. Amelia nodded. "We're gonna be okay." They drove away with nothing more than what they needed and everything they couldn't leave behind. Brighton Heights welcomed them with sterile modernity. Their temporary apartment overlooked the skyline. Amelia called it a spaceship. The night before his first day, Charles couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, thinking of Sarah. He took out her wedding ring and pressed it against the glass where it caught the moonlight. "Watch us," he whispered. "We're finally going." In the morning, a black car took him to Woodward. Amelia boarded the university shuttle. As they parted ways in the lobby, she turned and grinned. First days for both of us. Knock 'em dead, Leah. You too, Dad. He stepped through the Woodward lobby like a man entering the past. He thought he'd buried. This time he wasn't alone. This time he wasn't afraid. Charles stood in front of the sleek glass doors of the Woodward Technologies Innovation Lab, wearing the only button-down shirt he owned that didn't have oil stains. His badge, fresh from HR, caught the light, a simple plastic rectangle with a weight far heavier than its form. Jason, the young engineer who had shown him around weeks before, greeted him with the energy only someone in love with their work could manage. "Mr. Hartman, ready to dive in?" "Call me Charles," he said, shaking Jason's hand. "And yes, as ready as I'll ever be." The lab was a cathedral of light and motion. Glass panels, aluminum desks, open-concept workspaces humming with electricity and purpose. It smelled like ozone, coffee, and quiet revolution. Charles was home, but also not yet, not quite. Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of electrical systems, eyed him from across the lab as if mentally recalculating her expectations. She approached with calm precision. "So you're the mechanic who fixed our prototype." "That's me," Charles replied, steady. "Though I was an engineer before that." Elena nodded once. "Then let's see if you still are." Charles spent the first hour observing, listening. He asked questions that drew sideways glances, good ones. Then he offered 2 corrections to a schematic in progress. By noon, people weren't looking at him sideways anymore. They were nodding. At lunch, Pamela appeared at the lab door. She waved him over. "Walk with me." They stepped out onto the rooftop terrace where glass railings revealed Brighton Heights. In its engineered glory, "Word spreading fast," she said. "They're impressed." "Give it a week," Charles replied. "I'll either be their favorite or the guy who questions everything." Pamela smiled. "We need both." He hesitated, then asked, "Why me, really?" Pamela leaned against the railing. "Because I've seen brilliance buried under bitterness before. It's rare when someone digs their way out. Rarer still when they can still build. You fixed my daughter's car, yes. But what you really did was see a flaw in a billion-dollar design and say, this could be better. That's what I need." Charles looked out over the city. "I won't play politics." "Then make yourself indispensable," Pamela said, sharp as ever. "That's the best shield there is." That evening, Charles arrived home to find Amelia already deep in her notes from the university's summer program. "They gave me lab access today," she said, eyes shining. "Dad, they have a prototype hydrogen cell I got to hold." Charles grinned. "Careful, you're starting to sound like me." "Worse," she teased. "I might end up running your department." He laughed, full and real. "I'd be lucky." She hesitated, then added, "One of the grad students said my project might be eligible for the regional. Fair, the real one, not just school level." Charles's heart stuttered. "We'll make it happen, whatever it takes." Amelia nodded like she already knew. "We're not going back, are we?" He didn't have to ask what she meant. He looked around the apartment, clean, safe, full of light, a place where the future could take root. "No, Leah, we're not." She held a screwdriver. "Then help me with the voltage mod before bed." He took it with a smile. "Now that sounds like home." Charles arrived early the next morning, half an hour before the lab officially opened. The place was quieter than usual, filled only with the soft hum of servers and the faint echo of distant ventilation systems. He needed the solitude. There was something deeply centering about being surrounded by unfinished ideas. He had barely begun sketching notes on a whiteboard when he heard the door click. Dr. Elena Vasquez entered, balancing 2 coffees. "Figured you'd be here early. Thought you might like this." Charles blinked, surprised by the gesture. "Thanks." She handed him a cup. "Double-shot espresso. Heard you used to live on these back in your lab days." He raised an eyebrow. "Been doing some homework on me?" "Let's just say I like to know who I'm working with." They sipped in silence for a moment. Then Elena asked, "How much of your old work did Davidson keep?" Charles exhaled. "All of it. Patents, designs, Every breakthrough I contributed during those 7 years. They buried my name and kept the innovations. When I tried to fight, they dragged it out until Sarah got sick. I couldn't fight both battles. Elena nodded slowly, the sharp edges in her softened. You deserve credit. You always did. Before he could respond, Jason burst in, nearly tripping over his enthusiasm. Morning. Guys, you need to see this. The prototype with your thermal regulation mod. It ran a full cycle overnight, 0 drop in efficiency, not even 1%. Charles straightened. Show me. They followed Jason into the diagnostics room. The test. Rig displayed graphs that looked too perfect to be real. But the data was there. Solid, verified. Elena scanned the thermal mapping, then looked at Charles. This changes everything. Just then, Pamela entered, her stride quick, face unreadable. Good. You're all here, she said. Board wants a live demo, this afternoon. Henderson personally requested it. Jason's eyes widened. Today? But we're ready, Charles said firmly. He turned to his team. We've got 4 hours, let's make it count. The demo room was designed for theater. Tiered seating, massive screens, and a spotlighted work table at the center. By 2 p.m., every key executive and board member had taken their place, murmurs spreading like static through the room. Charles stood at the front, steady as ever. Amelia had texted him that morning. Remember who you are, he did. Good afternoon, he began. What you'll see today is not just an improvement. It's a proof of concept for a new generation of efficiency standards. Let's begin. The prototype pulsed to life. As data streamed onto the displays, numbers updated in real time. Thermal loss minimal. Energy conversion near perfect. Fuel consumption dropped by 14.7%. The room went silent. Then, a slow ripple of applause. Robert Henderson stood, adjusting his tie. Mr. Hartman, would you join me for a word outside? Pamela glanced at Charles. He nodded. In the hallway, Henderson studied him. You know, I voted against hiring you, thought you were a liability. But after today, I see a man who understands pressure, both mechanical and political. I didn't come here to play politics, Charles replied. Maybe not, but you're in the game now, and I want you to win. Davidson still holds patents based on your work. If you're interested, there may be a way to reclaim what was taken. Quietly, legally. Charles's jaw tightened. Why would you help me? Henderson's smile was thin. Because Davidson made me complicit once, I'd like to undo that before I retire. He handed Charles a card. My private counsel. They specialize in intellectual property recovery. No promises, just possibilities. Charles took the card, heart thudding. I'll think about it. Back inside, the applause was still fading. Pamela approached. You did it, she said. We did it. Charles corrected, looking toward Elena, Jason, and the team. But in the quiet between heartbeats, he felt something else. Something unfinished. Not just revenge, restoration, and maybe, just maybe, justice. Celebration at the lab had long ended, but Charles stayed behind. Most of the team had gone home hours ago, riding the high of the successful demo. The lights were dimmed now, casting long shadows across the innovation floor. Charles stood, alone in front of the prototype rig, tracing its polished surface with his fingertips, the way a sculptor might regard their final piece. But this wasn't the end. He pulled the card Henderson had given him from his pocket and turned it over slowly. In his hands, he'd spent years burying the rage, pushing it down for the sake of Amelia, for survival. But justice, true justice, was no longer a luxury he had to deny himself. Elena appeared in the doorway, her coat slung over her arm. Thought I'd find. You here? Charles half smiled. Didn't think I'd feel this, restless. Afterglow of success, and it wears off. Then comes the big question. What next? He held up the card. Elena stepped closer. You going to call? I think I have to, she nodded. I'll back you, so will Jason. Most of the team if it comes to that. Charles looked at her. Why? You didn't even know me 3 weeks ago. No, she agreed. But I know what it's like to have your work taken. And I know what it means to get a second chance. You earned this. You fight. We fight with you. They stood in silence for a beat. Then she added quietly, also, you make one hell of a cup of coffee. He chuckled, tension breaking. Don't let that get around. The next morning, Charles made the call. The law firm was discreet, efficient, and after reviewing the patents and timelines, intrigued. Within days, they confirmed what Charles already suspected. Several active patents at Davidson Automotive bore designs directly matching the schematics he had created before his departure. Schematics he'd documented, dated, and archived. Even if no one had cared to listen back then, the lawyers would proceed cautiously. No press, no legal fireworks, just pressure applied at the right fault lines. Pamela was the first to be informed. She said nothing at first, simply folded her hands and nodded. Then with steel in her voice, she said, if Davidson makes a move, they'll find themselves in a fight they can't win. You have my support. That evening, Charles arrived home to find Amelia on the floor surrounded by engineering magazines, schematics, and a notebook full of scribbled math. She looked up, eyes bright. Guess what? Professor Mitchell says the grant panel loved my demonstration. They're going to recommend me for a year-long mentorship program. I'd be working with real engineers, designing real tech. Charles knelt beside her. You already are, she grinned. Yeah, but now it's official. His gaze softened. For so long, he'd clung to hope like a man in open water clutches driftwood. Now he watched his daughter swim. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. It was one of his old schematics, pre-Davison, pre-downfall. He handed it to her. This was the first design they ever stole from me. It never saw the light of day. Until now. Amelia studied it with reverence. It's beautiful. You should frame it. I'm thinking, maybe we build it. Together. Her eyes lit up. For real? For real. Charles watched as Amelia scanned the diagram, already calculating, already thinking in 3 dimensions. And he felt it, not just pride, but continuity, legacy, not in fame or fortune or even patents reclaimed, but in her, this was the future. The following week unfolded like a quiet storm. Legal papers were filed discreetly. Davidson Automotive remained publicly silent, but their legal team had begun circling. Charles received a terse email, just 4 lines, from a Davidson executive. Are aware of your claim. You'll be hearing from our counsel. He showed the email to Pamela. She smirked. Let them play their hand. We're already 3 moves ahead. But the stress settled into Charles's bones like cold in old walls. At work, he was calm and focused. At home, insomnia returned. One night, he found himself back at the kitchen table, old habits reviving. Blueprints spread before him. A cup of cooling tea untouched. Across from him, Amelia's science project sat open, a bright contrast to the schematics of corporate battle. You okay? Amelia had come in quietly, in pajamas and messy hair. I thought I was past this part, Charles admitted. The not sleeping, the counting the hours kind of fear. Amelia sat beside him. You're not alone this time. Charles nodded, silent. Her hand found his on the table. You taught me engines are built on trust, each part doing its job. But when one part fails, the whole thing breaks down. He smiled. That's unexpectedly deep. She shrugged. I listen. Sometimes. They worked in parallel after that. She on her mentorship application. He on a redesign he'd shelved a decade ago. An ultra-light modular hybrid chassis. The kind that could revolutionize rural transportation. By Friday, Pamela called him into her office. We just got word. Davidson's agreed to arbitration. Charles blinked. That's fast. Pamela tapped her desk. They know they're exposed. The patent trail is airtight, and Henderson's quiet support on the board helped open the door. We'll negotiate a full transfer of rights back to you, or an exclusive license under your name. Charles sat slowly. absorbing the news. "They'll want NDA clauses," he said flatly. Pamela met his gaze. "We won't sign anything that silences your contribution. Not on my watch." That night, Charles told Amelia over dinner. Her reaction was subdued at first. Then she said, "You're really doing it. Writing it all." He hesitated. "Not all, but enough." Saturday morning arrived like a gift. Blue skies, quiet streets. Charles and Amelia returned to the garage behind their apartment building, now filled with tools Pamela's team had sent over. Together, they started rebuilding that old design. Bolt by bolt, idea by idea, they laughed, they argued. They measured twice and still cut wrong. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the frame of something new and deeply familiar began to emerge. It wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about the hum of creation, the steady rhythm of progress, and two engineers, one seasoned, one still rising, building more than just machines. By Monday morning, the apartment garage resembled less a workspace and more a laboratory in motion. Charles arrived early, his hands still smelling faintly of metal and sawdust from the weekend's late-night work. Pamela had arranged for a small, internal team to assist, but Charles insisted it remain just him and Amelia for now. The modular hybrid chassis they were assembling was a marvel of minimalism. Lightweight alloy, interchangeable components, and a flexible drivetrain that could accept multiple power sources, combustion, electric, or both. At Woodward HQ, murmurs had begun circulating. Jason had spotted the blueprints during a weekend drop-off. "This isn't just an upgrade," he told Charles quietly. "It's a paradigm shift." Charles offered only a small smile in return. That afternoon, Pamela called an impromptu strategy session. "We've scheduled a private demo for Thursday," she told Charles and the R&D team. "I want the board to see the prototype in action, not just schematics. Henderson's already on board, but we need consensus." "What's the ask?" Dr. Vasquez inquired. "A skunkworks division," Pamela answered. "Led by Charles. Independent. Budget. Full creative control." Charles blinked. "I thought I was already leading innovation." "This would be bigger," Pamela clarified. "Experimental design, strategic autonomy, a lab of your own." Silence settled over the room, reverent and charged. "I'd want Amelia involved," Charles said carefully. "At least part-time as an intern." Pamela didn't hesitate. "Done." That evening, he broke the news to Amelia. She tried to contain her excitement but failed spectacularly. "You mean like, I'd get a badge?" she asked, eyes wide. "And a lab bench," Charles nodded. "Under my watch." She threw her arms around him. The rest of the week blurred into motion. CAD refinements, supplier calls. A full night spent reassembling a test model after a miscalculated pivot point nearly destabilized the whole frame. But by Thursday morning, the prototype stood upright on its own wheels, sleek, silent, ready. Pamela arrived just before noon, accompanied by Henderson and two board members Charles didn't recognize. The test track behind the Woodward facility had been cleared. Charles stood beside the prototype, dressed not in a suit, but in his faded work shirt, sleeves rolled. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "this isn't a car. It's a platform. For rural communities, developing regions, emergency response units, anyone who needs customizable, sustainable transport without a six-figure price tag." The board watched as Amelia stepped forward, climbed into the driver's seat, and started. The engine, the prototype, hummed to life. Charles watched her steer it gracefully around the short loop. A simple pass, but enough. When she parked, the applause was spontaneous. Henderson turned to Pamela. "Build him the lab." Later, as they walked back toward the building, Amelia, beside him, Charles felt something settle in his chest. Not pride, not relief, certainty. For the first time in a decade, he wasn't proving himself. He was building something no one else could, and everyone watching knew it. Amelia received her company badge on Friday morning. It wasn't ceremonial, just the standard laminated rectangle with a barcode and her name printed below the Woodward logo. But she held it like it was a trophy. Her photo, hastily taken in the HR hallway, showed a teenager barely holding back her grin. Intern Systems Integration, it read. Charles pinned it gently to her lab coat. Wear it with caution. Power like this can go to your head. Amelia snorted. You're just jealous minds shinier. Word of the successful prototype demo had spread like fire through the Woodward building. By lunchtime, Charles's inbox was flooded with congratulatory emails and more than a few veiled requests to join the new Skunkworks team. Jason dropped by mid-afternoon, holding 2 coffees and a look of unfiltered admiration. That thing ran like a dream, he said. Board's already calling it the Hartman frame. Charles raised an eyebrow. I didn't name it. You didn't have to, Jason said. They're doing it for you. He handed over one of the coffees and lowered his voice. Just a heads up, Elena wants in, Vasquez. She said, and I quote, if I can't be on this team, I'll resign and poach it from the outside. Charles chuckled. Good, we'll need her. And you. By end of day, Pamela's office had drafted the formal paperwork. The Skunkworks division would operate on its own budget line, with Charles reporting directly to the CEO. The lab would be in Building B, glass and steel annex overlooking the river. Feels like we're building something from scratch. Amelia said that evening as they drove home. Like you and Mom used to talk about. Charles glanced at her, then out the window. The sun was low over Brighton Heights, casting warm light over the horizon. I was thinking the same thing, he said, but this time we're building it together. Amelia nodded, her fingers running over the edges of her badge. Let's make it count. Success came with a glare. Not from the lab lights or Brighton Heights' polished skyline, but from the way people now watched Charles Hartman. He noticed it first in the silence that followed him down the Woodward hallways. The engineers who once doubted him now nodded with quick, cautious respect. Some still smiled, but others looked past him as though struggling to make peace with how wrong they'd been. The headlines hadn't helped. Trailer Park Genius Behind. Woodward's breakthrough. The man Davidson tried to erase, now he's leading the future of green tech. It should have been satisfying, but it didn't feel like justice. It felt like scrutiny. Pamela called it the narrative cost of a comeback. You're a symbol now, she told him in her office, fingers steepled. And symbols attract attention, allies, enemies, even those who just want a piece of your story. Charles sat quietly, uncomfortable in the plush chair across from her. I didn't fix that car to become a headline. Pamela gave him a small, almost sad smile. You fixed it because you couldn't help it. That's what makes you dangerous, Charles. That's what makes you matter. That week, 2 different reporters requested exclusive profiles. A famous innovation podcast wanted a father-daughter episode. TEDx sent an invitation. But it was the industry conference in San Francisco that Pamela insisted he accept. They've never given a main stage to someone with your background, she said. You walk out there with Amelia, and you don't just prove a point. You rewrite the rules. Charles didn't like stages. He liked whiteboards, soldering tables, the sound of an engine finding its rhythm again. But when Amelia heard, her face lit up. They want both of us, she asked. To talk together? He nodded. On innovation under constraint. She was quiet for a moment then. We've got a lot to say about that. Back at the university, Amelia thrived, but not without friction. Her name appeared on 3 lab shortlists. A professor praised her thinking as decades ahead. But in the hallways and common rooms, there were whispers. She only got in because of her dad. Yeah. Well, it helps when your last name suddenly matters. None of it was said to her face, not directly, but Charles saw it in her eyes when she came home some nights. How her shoulders sagged even when her grades soared. He didn't lecture her. He just told a story. When I was in my first job, one of the senior engineers stole my design. Said, I couldn't possibly have come up with it on my own. He paused. You know what I did? You filed a complaint, she guessed. I let my work speak louder. Louder than gossip, louder than bitterness. And when the right people finally listened, you got buried, he smiled. And then I got back up. And this time, I'm not alone. She looked at him, eyes steady. I don't want shortcuts. I just want the same chance everyone else gets. You won't get that. You'll get more and less. But what you do with both, that's where the real story is. 2 days before the conference, Charles met with Henderson again. This time in Pamela's office. The board member was unusually quiet, tapping a pen against his tablet. Finally, he looked up. There's talk of a leadership reshuffle, he said without preamble. Not you, Pamela. Charles blinked. What kind of reshuffle? She's made enemies, fast ones. You've disrupted a lot of plans, Mr. Hartman, including some that were very profitable. Pamela didn't flinch. If they want to fight, they'll get one. Henderson glanced at Charles. Just be aware, the higher you climb, the more fragile the floor gets. Pamela's tone was steel. Let them come, we're not done yet. On the flight to San Francisco, Amelia studied the panel questions while Charles dozed against the window. Dad? She held up the last card. Final question. What's your greatest invention? He thought for a moment. Still, in progress, he said. She grinned. Good answer. He smiled back, but in his chest something tightened. They were walking into a world that didn't just want ideas, it wanted stories. And stories he knew could be twisted. But if they wanted a story, they'd get the truth. No polish, no pity, just a father, a daughter, and a spark no one saw coming. The lights on the San Francisco stage weren't warm. They were surgical. Bright, analytical, slicing through any pretense. Charles stood behind the podium in his best shirt, still not new, just pressed. Beside him, Amelia adjusted her mic. Calm on the outside, vibrating on the inside. The moderator smiled. Next up, a story that began with a broken-down prototype and a borrowed toolkit. Please welcome Charles and Amelia Hartman. Applause rolled through the packed auditorium. Not polite, eager. Charles stepped forward. I used to think brilliance had a look, he began. A title, a corner office, a white coat. For 10 years I wasn't brilliant. I was just a man fixing engines under a tarp, trying to get my daughter to school on time. He paused. Turns out brilliance can hide. Not because it's afraid, but because the world's too busy looking in the wrong places. Amelia took the mic. Her voice was steady, clear. We talk a lot about innovation, but real innovation doesn't always start in a lab. Sometimes it starts with someone who doesn't have enough. Enough time, enough money, enough tools. Constraints. Don't kill creativity. They sharpen it. She glanced at her father. He nodded. For my science project, she continued, I didn't have a university lab. I had leftover PVC pipe and a repurposed fan motor. But the system worked, because we understood the problem. We lived it. Slides appeared behind them, drawings of the pulse engine Charles had improved, diagrams from Amelia's fuel efficiency project. Together, they walked the audience through the intersection of real-life limitation and engineering insight. It wasn't flashy, but it was riveting. The last question came from a woman in the front row. Her badge read, NASA Energy Division. What's your greatest invention? Amelia answered without hesitation. My dad didn't invent a machine. He invented a way out, and he didn't do it in a garage or a boardroom. He did it every day he woke up and refused to quit. There was silence, and then a standing ovation. After the conference, the offers flooded in. A fellowship invitation from MIT, a joint grant with Brighton University for research on sustainable energy, a podcast interview scheduled with NPR. But not all of it was noise. The one Charles read twice came from the Department of Education, an invitation to consult on STEM outreach for underserved schools. The subject line read, Brilliance doesn't always look like you expect. At home, things changed too. Their faces were now familiar on LinkedIn banners and innovation websites. At Brighton, Amelia was approached by other students, not with condescension, but with genuine curiosity. One even asked her to mentor a younger student from a rural background. You're kind of a blueprint, they said. At Woodward Technologies, Charles noticed subtle shifts. Engineers who had once dismissed him now leaned in during meetings. Even Douglas Weber, the skeptical VP, offered a dry nod of approval during a quarterly review. "You've made believers out of skeptics," Pamela told him, "and a department out of fragments." But the best moment wasn't at the lab or on stage. It was a Thursday evening, quiet, just the two of them on the balcony. Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder. "Mom would have loved this view," she said softly. "She'd have been proud of you," he replied. Amelia smiled. "She'd have been proud of us." The next morning, Charles received a package at the office. No return label, just a note. "What they tried to bury, you made bloom. H." Inside, a framed copy of one of his earliest engine designs, filed under his name retrieved from the Davidson archive, and beneath it, a small gold plaque, "Reclaimed." Pamela found him staring at it, unmoving. "An old friend?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "One that used to haunt me." "And now?" "Now, it teaches me." On his final Friday of the quarter, Charles led a team debrief. The Pulse upgrade had exceeded expectations. Manufacturing had begun rollout. But what mattered most was how the team spoke. With pride, with clarity, like they believed again. Jason lingered after the meeting. "I never told you," the young engineer said, "but your daughter's project. It's the reason my sister applied to Brighton's outreach program." Charles blinked. "Really?" Jason smiled. "Turns out engineering doesn't just build engines. It builds bridges." Charles laughed. Quiet, tired, but real. "You think Amelia would be okay if I invited her to co-lead a youth workshop next quarter?" "She'd love that," Charles said. "And so would I." That night as they drove home, Amelia looked over from the passenger seat. "Do you ever think about going back? To Woodbury?" Charles didn't answer right away. "I think about who we were there," he said. "And I'm proud, but I don't want to go back. I want to build forward." She nodded. "Same." They sat in comfortable silence as the city lights of Brighton Heights blurred past. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were steering into something bigger, into something theirs. The end came quietly. No grand announcement, no final scene, just a Saturday morning. A breeze through the open balcony door, the scent of coffee and motor oil lingering on Charles's hands. Amelia asleep in her room, blueprints taped to her. All. A normal day in a life that no longer hurt to wake up to. Charles sat at the table reviewing a proposal from Woodward's expansion team. They wanted his input on a new energy-efficient engine line, this one named after a tree. The Hartman elm, someone had jokingly suggested. He didn't correct them. He looked out the window. Brighton Heights shimmered under a spring sun. But he wasn't thinking about the city. He was thinking about the trailer in Woodbury Meadows, the creak of the metal steps, the rust on the doorframe, the nights he counted pennies while Amelia slept. The silence that came after Sarah was gone, the long, aching quiet of being forgotten. And then, one broken-down engine, one moment where someone needed help, and he said yes. It hadn't been a rescue. It had been recognition of what still lived inside him. That's what genius is, he realized. Not the invention, but the instinct to try again, to keep building even when no one's watching. Behind him, Amelia stirred. "Dad?" Her voice was groggy. "In the kitchen." She appeared in the doorway, hair messy, hoodie too big. "You working again?" He smiled. "Just reading. You hungry?" She flopped into the chair across from him. "I dreamt about the trailer," she said. "I was fixing that old fan motor we used for the science fair," he laughed. "It held up longer than it should have." "Yeah," she said, then quieter. "It got us here." He reached across the table, took her hand. "We got us here." She looked at him, eyes fierce and full. "What's next?" Charles leaned back. For once, he didn't have a plan. He didn't need one. The future wasn't something he had to chase anymore. It would come to him, one project at a time, one question, one spark. And this time he'd answer it on his terms. "I don't know," he said. and smiled. But I think we'll build it. Together. As the credits of their old life rolled to a close, something new stirred. Off-screen. A knock at the door, an email blinking unread, a student in another town watching their conference video, wondering if they could do it too. A kid in a trailer. Park. Sketching an engine that doesn't yet exist. Because hope doesn't end. It hands itself forward. From one pair of weathered hands to another. And somewhere, just beyond the skyline, a new story waits. To be continued. Don't miss the next chapter. Subscribe for tomorrow's episode, where another hidden life steps into the light.